Everyone, in this tutorial we're going to talk about how we actually transfer information from the phone to the watch and the watch to the phone. And this is something that I've found quite complicated, especially because it needs to work cross-platform on Android and iPhone and all the different, you know, combinations of phones and watches that exist. So basically when we select a question, such as let's say we remove noise, how do these actions communicate and go directly to the watch and back again? So we will start by doing the data communication from the cell phone to the watch, and then later we will do the data communication from the watch to the cell phone, which occurs when we give a feedback point like this, that the data from the watch goes to the cell phone, and then from the cell phone goes to our cloud, to our database. So to get started, we will start in our index.json app on the watch itself. And if we scroll down to reading experimental questions from the phone settings, there is this aspect called Peersocket. Now there are two modes of communication between the cell phone and the watch. The first is Peersocket, and the second one is a process known as the inbox file transfer. And they work in different ways. Peersocket is a very rapid connection between the phone and the watch, and it happens almost instantaneously. However, for it to work, the Peersocket needs to be open. So if the watch or the cell phone is busy with some other task and its Bluetooth is somehow preoccupied, it may not work. So it doesn't work all the time. And as a result, we need to have this as a backup, which is like an inbox outbox procedure, where that data file goes into an outbox folder of the cell phone, and then later gets read by the watch in due time when a connection is made. It's much more slower, but it will work with the time. And in some combinations, especially with Android phones, this Peersocket almost never works. So it entirely relies on this for data communication. And it might be something to do with battery saving. The actual point is not clear, but basically both situations need to be running. Now, we will start here with the settings. So in the settings.jsx, I have these sections. And these sections, it's relatively intuitive. It's written kind of HTML-esque. And you can see here, these are the questions for the preferences. So we've got thermal, light, noise, indoor, outdoor. These are the questions that you see here, these items. And they are then saved in a key called flow index. Now in my companion, we have this function called send value. And we need to listen for a variation or a change that happens in the settings. So there are three ways this can be done. And I've got them written, all three of them written here. However, I'm only actually using this one. I've just kept the other two just in case certain updates might cause us to use this. But this is the most reliable one of all three of them. And it's just a on-change listener. And when the change is made, I just console log some stuff, and then I run my send value function, which is what I have down here. And then I say if the key is flow index or buzz time, so this set of questions is the flow index, and this set is the buzz time, then it actually executes a file transfer. The reason why I need this is because there's also settings such as selecting the user ID and selecting the experimental ID. Now I don't need this data to go to the watch because this data gets collected in the cell phone itself before it gets transferred to the cloud. I don't actually need to know what my user ID or experimental ID is on the watch. It's a setting that doesn't need to exist there. So only if the settings key is one of these two, we will send the value. So I then have a little JSON where I have my settings data, where I have my key, which is one of these two, the value, which is the value such as temperature, for example, here, and what time it was sent. Basically the current time at the moment. and then we execute this function send settings data. And send settings data basically executes both modes of file transfer. So it first checks if the Peersocket is open. And if the Peersocket is open, this is fantastic. We can then directly send the data using this function. It's really nice and easy, and it goes through. And then on the other end, we have a event listener that listens for a message coming in. So once that gets fired, this listener gets activated, and then I just have a kind of a simple if-else statement at the moment. This could be made to read a little bit better, but basically if it's something to do with the flow index, which is these questions here, then take in that information and do something about it. I didn't need to go into the exact details, but essentially it maps, that'll come in a different tutorial, it maps whatever information is here, it highlights these little circles, and it makes sure that those components, only those three components are being set. So if all of these are now unselected, it should just go straight to the feedback has been received. And at the same time, if it's not the flow index, then it's most likely the buzz time, and the buzz time just allows you to select how often the watch buzzes. Is it never, every hour, every 2 hours, etc. Now, what happens if the messaging fails? So if it fails, this if statement doesn't work, and it goes to the else, where it does it through file transfer. And the syntax is a little bit different. So we have this concept called the outbox, which I import up here. And we queue the same data, but it needs to be encoded as a CBOR. How do you pronounce it? CBOR? CBOR? Anyway, this is CBOR with the necessary information. Then this gets queued, and once queued, the next time the watch and the cell phone come into some form of Bluetooth connection, the data should go across. So for example, I could have my watch in a completely different room far away, make some changes on my cell phone, and the next time they come into contact, the data should go through. And likewise on the other side, on the watch side, I have another function. This one's called processing all files, where I then read the data, and it is done through this fs.read file sync. I believe I'm importing file sync here. And then in the same kind of way, once this is read as a CBOR file, I then have the file data, and I then more or less execute the same stuff. So I check that if it's part of the flow index, then it does a whole bunch of stuff, or if it's part of buzz time, then it does a whole bunch of stuff. And that is more or less it. So that is converting data from the cell phone to the watch. And I think I will stop this one here for now. And in the next tutorial, I will talk about transferring from the watch to the cell phone, because funnily enough, it's a slightly different mechanism. And I'll see you then.